You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 177. Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, where we dive into the world of mindful music making, peak performance, and crafting a purpose-driven life and career. I'm your host, violinist, certified performance and life coach for musicians, and your guide to unlocking your full potential, Dr. Renée HERE. Hi, everyone. How are you? I hope you're having a wonderful day as you're tuning in. I have a very inspiring episode for you today. I'm speaking with Kristin Leitterman, oboist and soprano. Kristin is assistant professor of oboe at Arkansas State University, where she teaches oboe, bassoon, double reed techniques, and is the woodwind area coordinator. As a performing solo artist, she brings exciting and unusual programs to audience across the US, Spain, Brazil, and Canada. She's also the author of the book, Relax and Take a Deep Breath, The Lucarelli Approach to Oboe Playing, published by Carl Fisher. She studied with Bert Lucarelli for 15 years at the Hart School and at CUNY Graduation Center in New York City. And in this book, she captures the essence of his approach to oboe performance, as well as his philosophy on pedagogy. The book presents his thoughts on general aspects of musical performance, such as memorization and performance anxiety, and it gives suggestions for effective practice, as well as a wealth of oboe-specific topics. She uncovers Bert Lucarelli's passion for sharing his ideas on oboe performance to help players progress and challenge them to explore their own approach to music making. In our conversation, we had a great time talking about pedagogy, her journey writing the book, and Professor Lucarelli's approach and philosophies, which are valuable to all musicians, regardless of their instruments. There's a lot of great wisdom ahead, and I hope you enjoy. Let's go to the show. Kristin Leitterman, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Kristin, I talk a little bit about you in the introduction, but I think the listeners would love to hear about that journey in your own words. So can you please tell us a little bit about this path of becoming a musician and what it looked like for you?
Sure. So I grew up in Missouri, just south of St. Louis, and it was a pretty rural area. And while none of my family are actual musicians, there was music around all the time. My mom and my aunt played piano, and my dad played guitar, and family members at gatherings would bring their instruments and sing and play. And I can remember at age around 3 watching, I think it was an orchestra on TV, and pointing and saying, I want to do this. I want to do this. And so they thought I wanted to learn violin. And so being where I'm from, I started learning fiddle at age 3 and did that for about 4 years. And then it kind of fizzled out, and I didn't have parents that were, keeping me on it, which I think was good for me. It wasn't, you have to practice this many hours or this, this long, which allowed me to explore a lot of things. I did sports and those sorts of things. But in 6th grade is when I started learning clarinet and wanted to be in jazz band. So I got a saxophone and started learning that. And I was also singing. I was in an actual formal choir and started doing competitions with voice. And at 13, actually did a talent show and sang. I had been inspired a little bit by Charlotte Church at that time.
I love
that. So I was singing a lot of the stuff that was on her first album. And that's kind of what I was known for in my town, was actually a singer. And got into high school and didn't want to march in marching band. So I quit band. But I was kind of asked to be back in it in the spring semester. And then I was kind of dared to play oboe. I had no idea what an oboe is, but I was like, why not? I like music and sounds like fun. So we started an oboe fund because we didn't have an oboe. And so my friends would give me their extra lunch money at the end of the lunch period. And so I think that locker probably still has all of these coins in it at my high school.
Oh my gosh, I love
Yeah.
that.
But after my freshman year, we got an oboe. And so I started teaching myself for about a year, and then went to learn from a retired band director who was actually a trumpet player. So I didn't have an oboe teacher at all the while I was still singing, and actually got nodules. So I was unable. I was basically on vocal rest for, I think it was like 6 or so months. And so oboe started to take over. And somewhere around there, I realized that I could do music as a career. It was just something that was fun at that point. And so I started to like think about college, and I did the worst thing possible, which is I auditioned at one school. I applied at one school. Luckily, I got in, and it was for voice and oboe.
Okay.
I did oboe as like oh, maybe they'll accept me and maybe I'll get to go. Um, and did a double performance degree for 3 years, I guess, and then realized I was headed towards oboe in my next step. So I saved a year of college by dropping the voice degree, and moved on to New England Conservatory. And also, while I was an undergrad, actually, I should go back and say that I had my first experience with Bert Lucarelli by going to his master class in the summer. I had no idea who he was. I even asked my teacher at the time, who was Barb Bishop, do you know this guy? Is he someone I should go study with? And she was like, yeah, he's a good oboist. And I think, has the same beliefs and thoughts I do about the oboe. So started studying with him, and almost went to the Hart School for my master's, but decided on the bigger name, going to New England Conservatory. But I found my way back to him in my master's, my artist diploma. And he kind of changed the trajectory of what my career was going to be, because I thought I was going to be an orchestral player. That's pretty normal for oboists. And at NEC, I kind of started to understand that probably wasn't what I was going to be happy doing, even though I thought that's what I had to do. And so when I got to my artist diploma at Hart, I was back with oboe and voice and seeing how those work together, putting on programs that complement each other using both instruments. And he was the perfect person to do that, which was great. And then kind of put the bug in my ear to start teaching. And so that's what led me into a doctorate and getting into collegiate teaching.
I love that journey. I love the meanderings, for a lack of a better word, and how following that curiosity and your inclination led to this path. I also agree with Professor Bishop that Professor Lucarelli seems to have a lot of the qualities that I aspire to as a teacher. And we're going to talk a lot about him. So let's get started, actually.
Yeah.
What is it about him that made him so special? I mean, you wrote a beautiful little book about oboe playing and about the approach. Well, it's called the Lucarelli Approach to Oboe Playing. Relax and take a deep breath. And I highly recommend it. In reading through it, I really resonated with a lot of his approach to teaching, and I took some notes. But I'd love to hear it from you first. So tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, I mean, just as a person, I've said this a lot, and I will always say this. He was probably the best human I've ever come across. Just warm, caring, And that's genuinely who he was. There was no, front that he would put up for the public. That was who he was as a person, as well as a teacher, or even as a performer. And he really had, a very interesting start to music in general. He was going to be a Major League Baseball pitcher.
Oh, wow.
Had
Talk about meanderings.
Right. Had an accident around age 14 where he almost lost both of his legs. And that meant his pitching career was pretty much done. And so his father recommended, hey, you should learn the oboe. And he Bert basically said, what's an oboe? And he said, you'll find out. And so at age 14, he started learning the oboe, and within about 4 years, he was actually playing with the Lyric Opera in Chicago. He grew up in I think it's the South Side of Chicago, and he had made so much progress that he was able to move into playing professionally within about 4 years. Now this was the 50s, so a very different time than now, and within about, I think, 3 or 4 years, he was playing principal with the Lyric, and really on top of his game. He was in the very early 60s making about $60,000 a year playing. So he was set, but he found himself not fully fulfilled. Ray Still had just gotten to the Chicago Symphony, and so he knew he was going to be there a long time. And so there was not really a lot for him to move up with. So he made the decision to leave all that behind and move to New York in search of, he wasn't sure what, just something more fulfilling. And that's when he started studying with Robert Bloom, who taught at Juilliard and Yale and was of the Bach Aria group. And he had, during college, studied with Ray Still, actually. And he started to get these varying styles of teaching from the two of them, both wonderful pedagogues and performers of their day. And so that kind of shaped who he was as a musician. And he kind of just fell into being a soloist. He is known as, I think the New York Times says, the America's only oboe soloist. We don't normally go for a career like that. Usually you have an orchestral position, and then you might solo, but your main job is doing orchestral work. And he didn't really have that. He had the Lyric and he had opportunities. They just didn't manifest. And so he was on this trajectory to become a soloist, a recitalist. And the thing is, as oboists, we didn't know what to do. Where do you stand? What's the, procedure? Pianists, no. Violinists, no. Cellists, no. But for wind players, it's very different. And so he started taking acting lessons, and he started taking painting and sculpting lessons so he could learn about the other arts and kind of incorporate that in. And I think for me specifically, but all of his students, that actually helped him as a pedagogue because he could relate and bring in so many different just ideas and thoughts and, abstract thoughts that I think really helped his students and helped him as a player. Because his first, I think, Carnegie debut, it went okay. The review was okay. But they basically just said he played well, but it was just an oboist on stage, playing with piano. And so he worked really hard, and that next one, the critic was just blown away.
That's right. I remember reading about this. Yes.
Yeah. And he had these series of recitals at Alice Tully Hall that one of them, I think it was one of these, that he actually descended from the ceiling playing Metamorphosis. So he was not opposed to the crazy, and I shouldn't even say crazy, but the different, the not just walking out on stage
The
play.
theatrics. Yes.
Exactly. And he collaborated with Martha Graham, the ballet company, and also, got funding to commission a concerto, which is one of our landmark works. It's not performed a lot because it was written in the 70s and a little extended technique that a lot of players don't necessarily want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was John Carigliano. It was a grant for an American composer to write an oboe concerto. And that is another thing that just kind of solidified him in the world of oboe playing.
There's so many things that sort of landed for me powerfully. And one of them is the fact that he really listened to his instinct and made a difficult decision to move on from a steady job. And I'm not saying that we should all quit all of the work that we have that we don't particularly feel passionate about. It's not always the right decision, of course, but sometimes it is important to answer that call if it's really pulling at us. And because it requires so much courage, a lot of us don't. So to look at all of the things he subsequently accomplished, including that Carnegie Hall anecdote that you mentioned, what's so important to notice from this is that first review was not glorified, and he didn't go about it by only practicing more. He went about it with a holistic approach. And okay, so how can I play better, but also how can I understand everything better? How can I understand myself better? What makes a great performance? And just went about it in terms of amplifying every aspect of himself, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
And that's so important, I think, for all of us to see how, for me, that incorporates a huge element of curiosity and exploration and almost playfulness, because taking acting lessons and not pottery, excuse me. What's the word in English? Sculpting. Yes. That means that this is someone who's inherently very curious and brings all of that in his artistic approach. And I think it's really important for all of us to hear this.
Yeah. And you used the word curiosity. That definitely describes him. He was very curious, and in a lesson he would be curious right with you. So if you were having a problem, he wouldn't just kind of say, well, this is the problem, and this is how we're going to fix it, and there's only this one way to fix it. He would actually craft the way he taught as if he was discovering the solution with you. He already knew the solution, but he had a way about him that you thought he was figuring it out with you, which made you feel like it wasn't this teacher-student role, but more of just a friend kind of helping you discover something that you need to fix in your playing.
I love that. I was going to ask you what inspired you to write about him, but in reading the book, I could see what it was. It's quite clear. And as Professor Bishop mentioned, he has, it seems from reading the book, such a fantastic approach to teaching. And I resonated with a lot of it. I mean, I took some notes here. Allowing students to explore their own individuality. And I think you said, bring that to the world. I mean, yes, this is what we want. How the learning process is individual and very personal. But one of the things that I've actually given a lecture on that is take ownership of your own experience. Learning is not a passive experience. I 100% resonate with this. I love that he talks about this fire to learn and how that's crucial. And I should say, from having interviewed so many extremely wonderful musicians over the years, is that I would say that's a common denominator, that fire to learn, that curiosity, that passion, that inner drive.
I think so. I mean, as a teacher myself, the ones that I think go the furthest are the ones that are always asking questions, always searching for, they get an answer and then there's another question that pops up because they're trying to understand, the world of whatever they're learning.
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, his story of Ray Still in the book, when he came into a lesson and Still didn't acknowledge him, didn't know he was there, and
Yes.
then cleared his throat and he was like, "Oh, you're here," and Lucarelli basically saying, "Do you want me to play?" And Still says, "No, I already have a career," and he talks about how basically Still says that it's like you're walking into a library hoping that you walk to the right shelf, the book falls off, hits you in the head, and opens to the right page. And a lot of students, a lot of people in life just hope that that's what's going to happen, that you just fall into what you're supposed to do. And sometimes that happens, but a lot of the times you have to seek it out. You have to really be in the driver's seat of what you want to do. And you can still meander with that, but you at least are making more decisions for yourself
Yeah.
than letting them be made for you.
And it's finding that right balance of taking in the guidance, taking in the instruction, and making it your own. And that's what makes a difference, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely.
And with that, I think things are moving in the right directions in terms of the way we teach. I'm so happy that it's slowly moving towards a more productive way of teaching, a kinder way of teaching, a much more respectful way of teaching, and that we're letting go of these old paradigms of the dictator teacher. And he really seemed to have embodied this from what I could read in the book. And you've mentioned it already. And I think that if everyone who's, let's say, studying music right now and thinking about teaching is how can you hold high standards while being extremely respectful of the person in front of you? How could you figure out ways to work with them?
Yeah.
And it seems to me like Professor Lucarelli had really that science down.
He really did. And I think the thing that I definitely do, like I will never be able to teach just like him, just as no one else will be able to do that. But there are bits and pieces in my teaching. And I think the one that I love the most is very simple. We're laughing all the time. You make a mistake, we laugh because it's our body just not accepting what we need to do just yet. It will eventually.
Right.
But if we get frustrated at not being able to play, a certain passage and don't laugh about it, then we get tense and all of the things we're trying not to do happen.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of laughter. A student will make a mistake and I'm laughing, but I'm laughing with them, not at them. But it's so that they know that it's okay. It's okay to make a mistake.
And this is very powerful for the nervous system too, because laughter diffuses tension. And if you make a mistake and you get upset about it and start judging yourself, you're really conditioning yourself for more stress and more anxiety. As with the laughter, and right, you and I understand that we're not laughing and taking it lightly and not making it a big deal, but this is not making it something that becomes traumatic.
Right. Right. Because I mean, so much, I know you've probably had this in the practice room just as I had. We're working on something, the performance is coming up, and we just can't get it in our fingers. We can't get it to work. And we get frustrated. We want to throw something across the room or something like that. But if we can bring that laughter into our practice and just say, okay, step away. My fingers don't want to do it right now, and that's fine. I mean, Lucarelli would even, in a lesson, if you kept missing something, he would stop and say, okay, play that again with the wrong note. And then he would look at you and say, don't do that again. And jokingly, so that you get it out of your system. And again, it's so the frustration goes away and the smile, the happiness comes back, because practicing can be frustrating. Lessons
Yes.
can be frustrating, but they don't have to be.
Right. It's in the mindset that we have about it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear more about the book, but I'm also fascinated by the process of writing a book. Before we hit record, you and I were talking about how it's a little bit like, well, it's not a little bit like, it's like any other endeavor that we embark on. It's preparing for an audition. It's maybe deciding to start a chamber music festival. Any sort of big project like this requires discipline, requires overcoming many fears and a lot of doubt and uncertainty. And as you were just talking about, when we practice, we want to throw, hopefully not the instrument, but something across the room.
Yes.
So a big project like writing a book is quite the journey to embark on. So I'd love to hear what it was like for you, maybe some of the doubts that you had to face and overcame. Um, Tell me everything.
Sure. So, um, this was really like a 10-year process, from the initial idea to being a physical book. And I mean, at that point, I was in my doctorate studying at the CUNY Graduate Center with him. And I had known him roughly about 10 years at that point and been watching him teach. I went to his masterclass, I think, every year from, 2004 to now. I actually run it. I've missed 1 year in that whole time. And so I've observed him teach, and it's a lot of the same, but a lot of variation based on who he's teaching.
Mm.
You know what he's going to say, but how is he going to say it? And so from all those observations, I started to realize that it's very different the way he approached teaching students. And I'd learned from a number of different teachers, and his was the most unique in my experience. And so I really wanted more people to be able to learn from him because he was getting older. And the way I saw that happening was, having a book out there that talked about exactly what he talked about, um, which was going through the fundamentals and going beyond into just how to be a performer, since that's what he did. And I can remember I got the idea. He was doing a master class at the Manhattan School, and I would usually come to see him when he would do those other master classes. And as he's teaching, I'm kind of jotting down like a general outline of, okay, we could talk about this, we could talk about this, and going through. And afterwards, I said, I have this really good idea. I think we should write a book together that is your teaching. And at first, he absolutely didn't want to do it because I think I used the quote from Bloom in the book that you can't learn from a book how to play oboe.
Mm-hmm.
But he started to warm to the idea. And so we did a series of interviews, probably about 4 or 5 hours, just sitting. I was sitting on the floor and he was in his chair in his office, just recording. And it was many stories I already knew, but it was good to have it in audio so I can go back. I transcribed everything and then had the very difficult task of putting it into prose. And I should say, I get into these projects and I have no idea necessarily how I'm going to do them, which is probably best. If I knew what the process was going to be, I probably would not do it. And a lot of my life has been that way, and I'm blessed with it being like that. But I had to sit on that for a while and figure out, he already had a book that was kind of an interview with a good friend. And so I didn't want it to be an interview. So I had to figure out how to take all of those stories and put them into prose. And so I finally kind of landed on, it would be me kind of telling from my point of view with some anecdotes and things of his teaching. And so we started working through different drafts. I got everything essentially on paper. And then we had more interviews where he would read through it. We would kind of edit and add things, correct things that maybe were wrong. And then we were almost ready and we wanted to be sure it was great. So we got an editor just to make sure that everything read correctly from an outsider point of view. And then we were able to get it to Carl Fisher, and now it's out.
I love what you said about how you go in these projects, and I'm paraphrasing, but
Mm-hmm.
not really quite sure how to go about it. And I 100% agree with you. There's no way to know how you're going to do it until you do it.
Yeah.
So if you wait to have the answer of how every little step is going to look like, nobody would ever start anything. So I totally agree with this, is just follow the breadcrumbs.
Yep.
And sometimes it's going to take 10 years.
Yeah.
And now you have this wonderful document that is such a great homage to him and his teaching. And it's information that all oboe players, and I think musicians at large as well, is very interesting, I think, for oboe players, because you have a lot of oboe specific information about reed making and articulation and things like this. But now they have this resource, this incredible resource that they can go to. So I agree with, everyone who says you can't learn from a book. But I do think it's great to have the books for reference, to remind yourself of the things that you are learning, that you have forgotten. And sometimes seeing it with your eyes is different than just hearing it. It anchors things differently. So I was heading in the direction of a question, and I forget what my question was. No, I remember what it is. So I totally agree about jumping on board before you exactly know how you're going to get there. And, you sort of build the raft as you're going.
Yes, exactly.
How was it for you I'm sure you had to face some uncertainties and doubts throughout. What helped you get past that and overcome these either stumbling blocks or uncertainties and doubts?
I mean, I think a lot of it is, again, Lucarelli was part of the project. So, he was kind of the cheerleader through it, and he really believed in it. By the end, he was so excited to get this out, because I think part of him knew that his time was not going to be much longer on this earth. And honestly, we knew it was out the day before he left the earth. He was sending texts and calling everyone and saying, it's out, you can go buy it right now. And then he was gone the next day. So I think him helping me see that this was important, and honestly talking with a lot of his students, my friends, about, hey, we're working on this, it's going to come out soon, and their excitement about it, knowing that they wanted to relive those experiences. I mean, I've had comments from a number of his students just saying, hey, I got the book, I've been reading it, I've been transported back to the studio at Hart and lessons with him. So I think that in the back of my mind, of knowing that this was important, even if I'm not the best writer, because I will admit I'm not, but the content was so important to get out to the world, especially now, because so many current students haven't experienced that, haven't experienced his teaching, and they can get a good idea of what it was through the book. It's, again, not going to teach you how to play oboe, but it's going to get your mind thinking, and other musicians' minds as well. It really, you can pull, I think any instrument can pull a lot of things from it, just kind of tabling the oboe specific things, and just reading it for that abstract, large picture.
Yeah, tell us everything about it. What's in this book for people who are interested in taking a look?
So we do start with the basics. So talking about breathing and support, which for any wind player, even maybe, I don't know, string players can help, just thinking about how the air is vibrating, the reed, or vibrating the mechanism that needs to vibrate. And we go into just talking about tone concepts, and of course articulation, which is important for us. But the second section, goes into just the application of these things. So this is for anybody. Just how do we learn? How do people learn? And he was very into knowing how people learn, and how each person is different in that. And so, we've talked about how he would kind of personalize the lesson. He knew how you learn, and if he got it wrong the first time, he's going to try a different angle. It wasn't just one way, which in my past I've had one way, and it doesn't always work unless you're that specific person that it works for. We talk about how to practice and memorization, which he didn't like to do that much, but he did do it, and had some good ways of working through that. And as a wind player, we don't do it a lot, so that could be really helpful for wind players. And then getting more into phrasing, and talking about vibrato, which he taught vibrato by talking about a flute player, John Lyon, they've just recently changed the website, but it's got flute players, it's got singers on the website where you hear the recording, and then he's slowed it down 300%. And you can hear how those waves are moving. And so he talks about, the fashion of vibrato and how it works for each instrument, because it's different. And I think that's important. And then we get to, I think, what's really important with him, which is the performance, the actual,
Yes,
what do you
that's
do
right.
on stage? It's so different, I think, from when an orchestral player thinks through, because you've got, especially as an oboist, you've got the entire orchestra around you, whereas a soloist, you're there. And so he had to think through a lot of those things. Also nerves, which everyone has, and as he would say, if you don't have them, you're stupid. Meaning you have to have a little bit of them to make the performance exciting. And the last big section in that is teaching, and so there's some anecdotes from his students, and just how he taught, which I hope helps others think about how they teach. And then I was just gonna say, we finish with reeds, of course, because you can't have an oboe book without reeds. But
I was going to ask if the people who suggested you play oboe and Ben had talked to you about what the reed component was going to be like before.
Gosh, no, I had no clue. In fact, I was handed the oboe with a plastic reed, essentially, one of those fiber reeds that is basically a kazoo. And so, no, I had no clue. And then I started getting in the weeds and the thick of things, and was like, oh, which I like. My hands always have to be busy, so reed making is great for me.
I think it's a beautiful book. It's so interesting to read, even as a string player, because of all of these components that you talked about, the performance, how we learn. And I resonate with so many aspects, as I've mentioned already so many times. And I can really see this being a staple on the shelves of all oboists, of course, any band teacher, or any musician who's curious on one of the great pedagogues' approach to teaching and practicing and performing. So yeah, I highly recommend. I'm definitely going to put a link in the show notes. It's published by Carl Fisher, and I love that you wrote this book with him, how he was such an intricate part of this whole book, in addition to, of course, being the main subject.
Yeah. And he was excited to be a part of it, because he could, and I think he says it in his forward or whatever, but he doesn't agree with everything necessarily, because some days he might think something and might think something the next day, but it's at this point the best he can do as far as this is how you play the oboe kind of thing.
Kristin, before we get to the actionable tip, there's one question I'd like to ask you. You mentioned how Professor Lucarelli was so eager to have, maybe I shouldn't say that, but how he really encouraged fun and laughter and joy in the practice room, in the studio. So what is one way that you bring joy in your practice?
I think one of the biggest things I learned from him is that practicing should be fun. And I am one of those people that actually does just genuinely enjoy to practice. If I can just practice all day, I genuinely like to do that. But it can be frustrating at times and you don't want to do it. And so what I learned from him really was to enjoy the puzzle, enjoy the game part of practicing. It's really, when you're sight reading, it's like the beginning of a puzzle where you're starting to turn over all the pieces and see where the parts go, where's the border and all of that. And then as you go back, you're starting to place each of those pieces to complete the puzzle. And I enjoy that. I enjoy puzzles. My brain works with puzzles a lot. And so not running a whole piece, but diving into little parts and feeling how it feels when I change rhythms, or how I play it really slowly and just really musically. That is exciting to me when I'm practicing.
And how about an actionable tip, something that the listeners could implement in their practice room or on stage or in their lives?
Yeah, most recently I've been, especially at the beginning of this year, I was so super busy with performances plus teaching and all of that, that I had to bring a practice journal back into my life, because I had, I think, on 4 or 5 sticky notes, all of the music I needed to learn in like 2 or 3 months. And I was going crazy. So the only way I could figure out how to stay on track was bringing back in the practice journal, which had a record of, I've worked on this spot, so don't work on that again. So you can work on this other spot or this other piece. And I started to reflect more and think about what I've done in my practicing, rather than just doing it and coming back and doing it again. And for me, it's gone into my teaching, where my students are actually using the Practisma journal this semester to kind of start their reflection, and there's some action challenges throughout as well. So I just say, get some sort of practice journal habit. It can be a digital one. It can be a physical one. I like writing, so I have a physical one.
Yeah.
It seems more real to me. I also use the Andante practice app, which has a journal feature. But I think to be successful, you have to have that reflection, and journaling can really help that.
I love that. Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because I have created a practice journal for my clients inside the Music Mastery Experience. And my goal would be to make that available to everyone outside the program. So maybe I'll ask you for some advice on how to get that published at some point.
Sure.
Kristin, thank you so much. Again, this is a beautiful book. It's titled Relax and Take a Deep Breath, the Lucarelli Approach to Oboe Playing. And I highly recommend that people check it out if they're interested. There's so many things that you mentioned today that are important for all of us to reflect on and maybe incorporate in our practicing and our approach to teaching, and also our approach of how we treat ourselves. If we are our very own teacher, then we need to treat ourselves as a beloved student, I think, right? So yes. Thank you so much for taking this time to speak with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And there you have it. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Kristin Leitterman. You can find more information about Kristin and her book by going to kristinleitterman.com or by visiting carlfisher.com. And of course, I'm going to have these links for you in the show notes. And if you found our discussion valuable, share this episode with friends and fellow musicians. Grab a screenshot of the episode, share on social, and with anyone you think might benefit from this conversation. Together, you and me, let's inspire and empower even more people on their musical journeys. Your support means the world to me. All right, that's what I have for you this week. Until next time, much love going your way, and à bientôt.